Hello everyone, this is Ingesha, your biology educator, and you are most welcome to study. Let us see, in this chapter we'll be studying about environment and we'll be studying about the surrounding area, the interaction between those organisms and the surrounding area. So let us see how the nature has devised beautiful ecosystem, a beautiful system, beautiful mechanism to let all the individuals survive on this planet. So we'll be talking about the natural system and how the organisms survive and how they actually interact with their surroundings in this chapter. So let us see what we have in store in this chapter. And all organisms such as plants, animals, microorganisms, and living beings, as well as the physical surroundings, interact with each other and maintain a balance in nature. All the interacting organisms in an area, together with the non-living constituents of the environment, can form a system, and hence this system is very, very important in devising the different mechanisms in nature. What is environment? Environment simply means surroundings. As we talked about, surroundings of the organism actually refers to the environment. Hence, the environment of an individual object, element, or system means anything that is immediately surrounding the object. Okay, so anything that is individually surrounding your that is there in your surroundings, right? Any tree or any house or anything as such, everything is environment. So the organism is surrounded by nature and hence the surroundings are known as environment. We'll be talking about ecosystem. All the interacting organisms in an area together with the non-living constituents of the environment form an ecosystem. So if we talk about how organisms interact, like we are the organisms, right? The animals are the organisms. There are microorganisms which are organisms, right? So how these organisms actually interact with nature and with the non-living constituents of the environment. And this whole system that we take up, right? The whole system constituting the in organisms and the non-living constituents of the environment are together known as ecosystem, right? We can see here there are living organisms, there are non-living organisms, there are water, mountains, etc. These are non-living organisms. There are birds, animals, trees, everything. These are living organisms. So living components and non-living components of the environment together and the interaction between them, they are together known as the ecosystem, right? There is a system, proper system of interaction that we have, and that is known as the ecosystem. So now let us talk about the biotic and abiotic components in an ecosystem, right? So what do we actually mean by the biotic and abiotic components? Biotic components are basically the living organisms, and abiotic components are comprising of the physical factors that exist in nature, the non-living physical factors that we consider, like temperature, rainfall, wind, soil, and minerals. So here we can see different examples of biotic and abiotic factors. An ecosystem consists of biotic components comprising living organisms and abiotic components comprising the physical factors. So what are the biotic factors that we have? Such as bacteria, fungi, trees, archaea, animals, protists. All these are living organisms and they are collectively referred to as biotic factors. Whereas we have the non-living factors like the abiotic factors that are like air, salinity, soil, temperature, light, water, minerals, pH, humidity. All these are abiotic factors. So let us see how let us take an example of ecosystem and let us see how the organisms actually interact in the system known as the ecosystem. So we are taking here garden, okay? The example of a garden ecosystem. All the living organisms in the garden interact with each other, and their growth, reproduction, and other activities are affected by the abiotic components of the ecosystem. Hence, a garden is an ecosystem. So here you can see how the organisms and how the living and the non-living organisms are actually interacting, and there are factors that are working behind, right? They are interacting with the nature. The organisms are interacting with each other as well as they're interacting with their surroundings, and hence this kind of a system together, where different kind of organisms, there are specific organisms which can interact with specific organisms, right? There are such specific interactions between the organisms, and such a system that is made up here is called as the ecosystem, and the ecosystem that we are taking here as an example is known as the garden ecosystem. We find different plants such as grasses, trees, flower-bearing plants like rose, jasmine, sunflower, and animals like frogs, insects, and birds, all in the garden ecosystem. So here, if you are said about what are the components of the garden ecosystem or what kind of organisms are found, so you can just name all those organisms and the interaction between them, and together the system that is formed is known as the garden ecosystem. Here you can see the example of a garden ecosystem in this video, that the butterfly is interacting with the flowering plant, and hence there is an interaction between them which make up the garden ecosystem. Now let us design an aquarium, right? So aquarium is a very good example of a human-made ecosystem where there are specific interactions between organisms, right? So what are the things that we need to keep in mind when we create an aquarium? So we need to keep in mind that the fish would need a free space for swimming, right? The fish that are present in the aquarium would need a free space for swimming. And it could be a large jar or anything as such. There should be a big container that we should use, right? And there should be availability of water, oxygen, and food. We have to provide oxygen through an oxygen pump that is known as an aerator, which will continuously supply oxygen in the water, because the fish actually take up the dissolved water and dissolve oxygen in the water, and hence we need to use the aerator to have a continuous supply of oxygen. And the fish food which is available in the market is very, very important, because the fish should be provided with the supply of food as well, because this is a human-made ecosystem, is an artificial ecosystem. That is why the humans need to take care of them, right? So this is all about an aquarium, which is a very, very good example of human-made ecosystem. Now let us see the types of ecosystem. Okay, so there are different types of ecosystem, that is natural ecosystem and artificial ecosystem. So natural ecosystem we have as the examples of desert, forest, lakes, rivers, oceans, etc. And the artificial ecosystems are the ecosystems that are made up, right? Like garden, zoo, aquarium, trophies, etc. So these are the very, very important, the differentiation that is made between the natural ecosystem and the artificial ecosystem. Now, how are grouping of living organisms done in nature? We have to study about this, right? So there are certain groups of organisms that exist in nature. The first group is producers. So all green plants and certain bacteria which can produce food by photosynthesis are together known as producers. So what they do is they provide food. They are the source of food for all the living organisms that are living, and all the heterotrophic organisms which actually derive their food from other organisms, right? So these producers are actually the green plants and certain bacteria which can essentially provide the process of photosynthesis and can produce food, right? Then the next group of organisms that we have is consumers. So what do consumers do? Consumers are the organisms which consume the food that is produced either directly from the producers or indirectly by feeding on other consumers, as are the consumers, right? These are the organisms that are known as consumers, which take food directly from the producers or indirectly by feeding on other consumers. So they can be classed variously as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and parasite based on their feeding habits. So we can actually differentiate them based on their feeding habits, and these are known as herbivores, carnivores, omnivores, and parasites. So herbivores are the plant-eating animals, carnivores are the consumers which actually feed on other consumers, and omnivores are the organisms which can feed on both plant as well as animals. And parasites actually derive their food from other organisms, right? So that is how, and they live on other organisms, and the organism which they live on is known as host organism, and the parasites are the one that derive their food from the host organism. So this is how the consumers work. So now let us talk about the next group of organisms, that is decomposers. So decomposers are basically the microorganisms which break down the complex organic substances into simple inorganic substances that go into the soil and are used up once more by the plants. So basically these organisms, that are the microorganisms, help in recycling the substances that are present in nature, and that is why these decomposers are very very important in the recycling mechanism that happens in nature, right? So that is all about this organisms and the environment that we live in. We talked about ecosystem, we talked about different kinds of ecosystem and the groups of organisms that are living in the ecosystem. So that is all about it. We'll be continuing with the next half of the chapter about food chain and other topics in the next video. Thank you so much.